You're watching this video. You're hearing my voice. You feel present, conscious, real. But what if I told you that you, as you believe yourself to be, may not really exist? That your sense of self is not a thing, but a story. A story told by your brain to itself. This isn't science fiction. It's neuroscience. And today, we're stepping into one of the most unsettling, profound questions humanity has ever faced. What if consciousness is an illusion? Stick with me, because by the end of this episode, you might never experience reality the same way again. 1. What is consciousness, really? Let's begin at the beginning. When we talk about consciousness, what do we mean? It's that feeling of being awake, aware, present. The sense that there's a you behind your eyes, thinking, choosing, experiencing. You might think, I am not just my body. I observe. I reflect. I feel. I have free will. But here's the problem. We can't locate that I. Despite decades of neuroscience, no scientist has ever found a region in the brain that is the seat of consciousness. There is no soul chamber, no central observer, no ghost in the machine. What we have instead is circuitry. And yet, you feel like someone is home. That illusion is where this story begins. 2. The binding problem. Who's in charge here? Let me introduce you to something called the binding problem. It goes like this. Your brain receives millions of inputs per second from your eyes, ears, skin, and internal organs. But all those signals are processed in different parts of the brain. So how do you experience a unified world? How does the smell of coffee, the sound of music, and the sight of your phone all arrive together in the same moment? The short answer, we don't know. There's no known mechanism that fully binds all these signals into a single, seamless stream we call experience. Your sense of continuity may be an after-the-fact construction. The brain edits the movie, then plays it back to you as if it happened that way in real time. Just think about what that means. You may not be living the moment. You may be remembering it an instant after it's already happened. 3. Split brain experiments. 2 minds, 1 head. In the 1960s, doctors performed split brain surgery on patients with severe epilepsy. They cut the corpus callosum, the bundle of nerves connecting the 2 hemispheres of the brain. What happened next shook the foundations of neuroscience. Patients behaved oddly. The left hand would do things the person couldn't explain. One hand would button a shirt while the other unbuttoned it. The left hemisphere would speak confidently, but it didn't know what the right hemisphere was seeing. It was as if 2 separate consciousnesses were living inside one skull. If consciousness is unified, how could it split like that? The conclusion? There may not be a central self at all. Just competing modules, communicating. Or not. You think of yourself as a single I. But maybe, you're more like a team. And the illusion of one captain at the helm? Just clever editing. 4. The conscious narrator making sense after the fact. Ever catch yourself saying, I did that without thinking. You reach for your phone. You open the fridge. You type a sentence. Then, you realize what you're doing. That's because consciousness often lags behind behavior. Your actions can be initiated by neural processes before you're aware of them. A famous experiment by Benjamin Libet in the 1980s found that the brain signals to initiate movement occurred hundreds of milliseconds before people reported the conscious decision to move. In other words, the decision was made before you thought you made it. And your mind simply made up a story afterward. A narrator explaining something it never directed. This isn't a glitch. This is the system. Consciousness isn't driving the car. It's sitting in the passenger seat. Writing a blog about how it's driving. 5. Illusions of choice. Who's pulling the strings? Let's push this further. Every day, you make choices. You decide what to eat, what to wear, who to text. But where do those decisions come from? Are they you? Or are they the product of Your genetics. Your environment. Your habits. Your mood. Your gut microbiome? The brain is a prediction machine. It generates decisions before you're even aware there's a choice. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that researchers can predict your decisions up to 7 seconds before you consciously make them. You feel like you're choosing. But you may just be noticing the choice your brain already made. So, are you really free? Or are you just watching the movie of your life and calling it me? 6. Real-life example, the blind spot of the self. Here's a practical example. Have you ever been in a heated argument, said something cruel, and then minutes later insisted, "I didn't mean that. That's not who I am." But it was you, at least, it was your brain. In moments of stress, the brain routes through faster, less rational pathways like the amygdala. Later, your prefrontal cortex steps in, rationalizes, reinterprets. So you feel like the conscious self is separate from the one who acted. But it's not. You don't have one unified self. You have multiple systems, often in conflict. And the voice you hear explaining it all? That's just the press secretary. Not the president. 7. The comfort of the illusion. Why do we believe we're conscious agents? Because the alternative is terrifying. To admit that your thoughts arise without your control. To accept that the self is a construction. To face the possibility that you are just a story your brain tells to itself. That's existentially disorienting. So we cling to the illusion. Not because it's true, but because it's useful. Believing you're a person with agency and a continuous self helps you make plans, take responsibility, build identity, function in society. But utility doesn't equal truth. Just because the illusion works doesn't mean it's real. 8. Where we go next, peeling the illusion. Now ask yourself, if I am not the thinker of my thoughts, if I am not the chooser of my choices, then what am I? A watcher? A witness? A passenger? Or something else entirely? In part 2, we'll explore the hard problem of consciousness. Why subjective experience exists at all. And why science, for all its power, still can't explain how or why it feels like something to be you. So if you found yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself, good. That's where the real work begins. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, because the next chapter goes even deeper. And trust me, you'll want to remember how this started. Part 2, the hard problem, why anything feels like anything. You're not just processing data. You're feeling it. Pain doesn't just register. It hurts. Colors aren't just wavelengths. They glow. Music doesn't just enter your ears. It moves you. But why? Why should a lump of biological tissue, your brain, produce subjective experience? Why does a neural signal feel like red, or loneliness, or awe? This, right here, is what philosophers and neuroscientists call the hard problem of consciousness. And today, we're going to stare directly into its impossible depths. 1. What is the hard problem? Coined by philosopher David Chalmers in the 1990s, the hard problem asks, why does physical processing in the brain give rise to conscious experience? Think about it. We can understand the mechanics of the brain. We can explain how neurons fire, how signals move, how decisions get made. But none of that explains why it feels like something to be you. Why does a brain need to produce subjectivity? Why isn't it just a black box that processes inputs and outputs like a computer? You could replicate every function. Memory, language, decision-making, and still, you wouldn't get consciousness. That's the mystery. And it's not just unsolved. It may be unexplainable. 2. Easy problems versus the hard one. Let's draw a line. There are easy problems of consciousness. Not easy to solve, but easy to frame. Examples. How does the brain process visual information? How do we focus attention? How do we form memories or use language? These can be broken down into mechanisms. But then comes the hard problem. Why should any of that be accompanied by experience? A computer can recognize faces. It doesn't see. A robot can detect damage. It doesn't feel pain. So why do you? Where in the machinery does the magic switch flip? No one knows. And worse, no one even knows what an answer would look like. 3. Consciousness versus intelligence, not the same thing. Here's something you need to understand. Consciousness is not intelligence. Consciousness is not behavior. Consciousness is not language. These things can exist without subjective experience. You can build an AI that solves problems, passes Turing tests, and mimics emotion. That doesn't mean it's aware. It might just be very, very good at pretending. So even if we recreated a perfect model of the human brain, how could we know whether it was experiencing anything? This is called the problem of other minds. And it cuts both ways. How can you prove that I'm conscious? Or that your dog is? Or your baby? You can't. You just assume. And maybe that's all we've ever done, with ourselves included. 4. The explanatory gap. Let's go deeper. Imagine this. A neuroscientist knows everything about color perception, every wavelength, every retinal process, every cortical response. She's spent her entire life in a black and white room. She's never seen color. One day, she walks outside and sees red for the first time. What does she learn? This is the famous Mary's Room thought experiment by philosopher Frank Jackson. It reveals something profound. There is a gap between knowing about a conscious state and experiencing it. You can explain the mechanics forever and still never touch the actual feeling. The redness of red. The burn of shame. The ache of love. That gap. That's the hard problem staring back at you. 5. Is consciousness fundamental? Here's a radical idea. Maybe consciousness isn't a byproduct of the brain. Maybe it's a fundamental property of the universe. This view is called panpsychism. It suggests that all matter, down to the smallest particles, might contain some rudimentary form of experience. Not thinking or feeling like humans, but some basic proto-consciousness. In this view, the brain doesn't create consciousness. It organizes it like a radio tuning into a signal. Still speculative. Still unproven. But more scientists are starting to take it seriously. Because the alternatives aren't much better. If the brain produces consciousness, we don't know how. If consciousness emerges from complexity, we don't know why. Panpsychism doesn't solve the hard problem. But it reframes it. Maybe the problem isn't how the brain makes experience, but how it focuses it. 6. Real-life parallel, the dream that feels real. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a dream so vivid you thought it was real? You felt the fear. You saw the colors. You were there even though you were asleep. And then you woke up and realized it was all generated by your brain. So, why does waking life feel more real? Because it's consistent? Because it lasts longer? But what if you're in another dream right now, one governed by sensory input and memory? And your brain is simply doing the same thing. Making a model. Creating experience. We assume that reality causes consciousness. But maybe, consciousness is creating your reality model. And maybe that's all you've ever known. 7. The zombie problem, could a brain work without experience? Let's run a creepy thought experiment. Imagine a creature that looks exactly like you. Talks like you. Thinks like you. But it has no inner experience. No qualia. No consciousness. It's called a philosophical zombie. This zombie passes every test. But there's nobody home. Could such a creature exist? And if it could, how do you know you're not one? You assume you're conscious because you feel it. But how would anyone else ever know? This is the isolation of subjectivity. And it makes consciousness not just a scientific mystery, but a philosophical abyss. 8. Why this matters: consciousness is everything. You might be wondering, why does any of this matter? Because consciousness is all you've ever known. Every hope, fear, joy, pain, love, memory, and identity. It's all happening in consciousness. You don't know the world directly. You know your experience of it. So if we don't understand consciousness, then we don't understand ourselves. And we don't even know if we're real, or just part of a story the brain is telling itself. With no audience, no narrator, no self. Just signals, pretending to be a soul. 9. Next time, what is the self? In part 3, we take a hard look at the most persistent illusion of all: the self. Who or what is the I you think you are? If consciousness is a story, then the self might just be the main character your brain invented to keep the plot moving. We'll explore how the self develops, when it collapses, and why losing it might be the most freeing thing you can experience. If you've been with us this far, you already know this is no ordinary science series. Hit subscribe if you haven't. You'll want to witness what comes next. And ask yourself, right now, what part of me just made that decision? Part 3, the illusion of the self. A silhouette stands before a mirror. But in the reflection, there's no face. Only shifting static. You call yourself me. You say I think, I want, I remember. But who exactly is that I? A soul? A core identity? A single unchanging self? Or is the self just the brain's most convincing hallucination? Today, we unravel what might be the deepest illusion of all: the self. And by the end of this episode, you may begin to question the person you think you've always been. 1. The self feels real. But what is it? Every day, you wake up with a sense of continuity. I am the same person I was yesterday. But what exactly is that person? Is it your memories? Your personality? Your body? You might say, it's the part of me that thinks and feels, that knows it exists. But here's the catch. The more science investigates the self, the more it disappears. There's no single spot in the brain where the self lives. No center of experience. No internal CEO. Just a network, processes and modules working together. And the sense of you? That might just be the story those modules tell. 2. The brain as a storyteller. Your brain is constantly weaving a narrative. It interprets inputs. It guesses intentions. It builds causal chains. And most importantly, it creates a character, a protagonist. That character is you. But like any good character, you're a construction. Based on habits. Shaped by memory. Filtered through emotion. Biased by evolution. In psychology, this is called the narrative self. It's not the one doing the work. It's the one explaining the work after it's done. So when you say, I decided, it might be more accurate to say, my brain made a decision, and now I'm telling a story about it. 3. The self is a user interface. Here's a mind-bending analogy from cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman. Your self is like a desktop icon. It's not the reality, it's a useful simplification. You click the folder icon, but it's not really a folder. It represents complex electrical processes happening invisibly. Likewise, the I you feel isn't real in a fundamental sense. It's your brain's interface, a way to navigate a chaotic inner and outer world. It helps you survive, make decisions, avoid danger, build relationships, But just because it's useful doesn't mean it's real. For real-life experiment, the rubber hand illusion. Let's make this concrete. In the rubber hand illusion, researchers place a fake hand in front of a participant and hide their real hand. They stroke both hands simultaneously. Within minutes, the participant begins to feel as though the rubber hand is part of their body. They flinch if it's threatened. They report owning it. Why? Because the brain is predictive, not just reactive. It builds a model based on sensory alignment. That same principle applies to your sense of self. Your body, memories, emotions, they're stitched into a narrative. But that narrative is flexible. And it can be hacked. Which means, it may not be you. 5. When the self breaks down. Let's look at moments when the illusion collapses. Brain injury, damage to the parietal cortex can erase the sense of bodily ownership. Depersonalization disorder, people feel like they're watching themselves from outside their body. Meditation, advanced practitioners report the dissolving of the I, a shift into pure awareness without identity. These aren't fantasies. They're measurable, reportable experiences. If the self were fundamental, it couldn't vanish. But it does. And when it does, what's left? 6. The self as an emergent property. So if the self isn't a thing, what is it? Think of a wave on the ocean. The wave looks like an object. It has shape. It moves. It seems distinct. But a wave is just the behavior of water, given temporary form. Likewise, the self may be the temporary pattern created by brain activity. An emergent process, constantly in motion. This is why you change over time. You're not the same self at age 5, 15, or 35. Your memories shift. Your personality evolves. Your values morph. But the illusion of continuity remains. Because the brain needs it to. It's like a moving spotlight on a dark stage. Always shifting, but never showing you the machinery beneath. 7. You are not your thoughts. Here's a thought. I am a terrible person. Who said that? Was it you? Or was it a thought arising on its own? In meditation and cognitive therapy alike, there's a realization. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness of thoughts. This realization breaks the spell. You stop believing every story your brain tells. You stop identifying with every fear, every craving, every internal voice. And in that silence, something deeper remains. Not the ego. Not the narrative. Just awareness itself. Could that be the real you? 8. Why this illusion exists. Let's not forget. The self, like consciousness, is an illusion with a purpose. It helps you navigate complex social environments. Remember your past. Imagine your future. Make choices and assign responsibility. It's not malicious. It's adaptive. But illusions can overstay their welcome. The belief in a fixed, separate, isolated I leads to suffering, anxiety, fear of death, in-group/out-group violence. The illusion of control. Recognizing the self as an illusion doesn't remove function. It just removes attachment. 9. Letting go, a different kind of freedom. Here's the twist. You don't have to be someone to be free. You don't need a fixed self to have meaning. In fact, letting go of the rigid I opens up compassion, clarity, peace, curiosity. You stop asking, what do I want? And start asking, what is happening through this body, this mind, this moment? The wave stops thinking it's separate and realizes it's the ocean. Maybe that's the real self. Not a thing you own, but the flow of existence itself. 10. What comes next? The illusion of time. If the self is not real, what about your past? Your future? Your plans, regrets, and ambitions? They live in time. But what if time itself is just another mental construction? In Part 4, we explore the illusion of time and why your experience of it may be nothing more than the brain's narrative device. We'll look at how time perception is manipulated, why time speeds up or slows down, and how letting go of time transforms consciousness itself. If you've made it this far, you're already beginning to see the matrix. Subscribe if you haven't, because next time, we bend time itself. And maybe, just maybe, we find out what it means to live outside the story. Part 4, The Illusion of Time. We think of time as a straight line. We move through it, from birth to death, from past to future. But what if time is an illusion? Not just how we experience it, but the entire concept. In this episode, we go deeper into the rabbit hole and ask, what is time? And why might it be nothing more than the brain's most elaborate fiction? 1. Time feels real. But it's not what you think. Every moment of your life feels embedded in time. You remember your past. You anticipate your future. And in between, you live in what we call the present. But that present? It's a mental construction. Because by the time your brain processes this very moment, it's already past. What you're experiencing right now is not the world as it is, but the world as it was a fraction of a second ago. Your now is a simulation. And your sense of time is the software running the show. 2. Physics says time might not exist. Let's step outside the brain for a moment and into physics. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time is not absolute. Two observers moving at different speeds or in different gravitational fields can experience time differently. Time dilates. It stretches. It bends. There is no universal now. More radically, some physicists believe time is not fundamental to the universe. In quantum mechanics and theories of gravity, time often disappears from the equations. What does that mean? It means the flow of time, the one you feel every second, might not exist at all. 3. The brain invents time to make sense of change. So if time isn't out there, where is it? Answer: it's in you. Your brain constructs time to make sense of change. It creates a timeline, a sequence of events, to impose order on chaos. When you remember something, you're not replaying a video. You're reconstructing a mental model, filling in gaps, smoothing over edits. Same with the future. You don't see it. You predict it. This predictive processing gives rise to your sense of flow. Of past, present, future. But it's all happening in the present moment. In real-time construction, time is not something you move through. It's something your brain generates. For real-life example, how time warps. You've felt this before. A boring meeting lasts forever. A joyful moment vanishes in a flash. A car accident stretches into slow motion. Time isn't fixed. It's subjective. And studies prove it. When you're afraid, your amygdala becomes hyperactive. It enhances memory formation and slows your perception of time. When you meditate, time dissolves altogether. When you're in flow, hours feel like minutes. So what is real time? There may be no such thing. Just mental models. Just shifting frames. Just the illusion of duration. 5. The specious present. How long is now? Philosophers have a term for the strange width of the present moment. The specious present. It's not an instant. It's a small window, maybe a few seconds wide, during which your brain binds together inputs and memories into a coherent now. Think of it like a film reel. Each frame is separate. But played together, they create movement. Your consciousness stitches together discrete sensory snapshots and feels time. But beneath that illusion, there's just this: a series of nows, with no objective flow between them. 6. Time and the self are linked. Here's where it gets deep. Your sense of self is tied to your sense of time. You remember being a child. You imagine being old. You believe in continuity. But if the self is an illusion and time is too, then what exactly is traveling through this timeline? Is there really a you who persists? Or just a chain of moments stitched together by memory and prediction? This is where meditation, psychedelics, and even trauma can shift perception. They break the illusion of temporal continuity. And when time stops, so does the self. 7. Free will and the time illusion. Let's take this further. If time is constructed and the self is constructed, then what about free will? Studies by neuroscientist Benjamin Libet show that brain activity for a decision appears before a person becomes aware of choosing. In other words, your brain makes the choice, and then your self takes credit. But if that's true, what's really happening? Is there a decider? Or just a sequence of outcomes, explained after the fact? And if time is just a lens, then free will might be the illusion within the illusion. A shadow inside the dream. 8. Living without time, what that means. This sounds abstract, but it's practical. Because when you stop seeing yourself as a being in time, you start living more fully in the moment. You stop carrying regrets. You stop fearing outcomes. You realize the past doesn't exist. It's memory. The future doesn't exist. It's imagination. Only this moment is ever real. And this moment is always changing. So are you. And that's okay. 9. The eternal now, a different kind of awareness. Across spiritual traditions, from Buddhism to Stoicism to Eckhart Tolle, there's one central insight. Reality is always now. Time is a story. The eternal present is the stage. And when you tune into it without reaching forward or clinging backward, you awaken to something deeper. Not time-bound thought, but timeless awareness. Not the self in time, but consciousness beyond time. It's not about clock hours or schedules. It's about a shift in perception. From doing to being. From becoming to being aware. 10. Next time, consciousness without a brain? We've questioned the self. We've unraveled time. Now we take on the most controversial question of all. Can consciousness exist without the brain? In Part 5, we'll explore near-death experiences, reports of awareness during clinical death, and theories of mind that challenge materialism itself. Could consciousness be non-local? Could you be more than a brain? Or is this just wishful thinking? The only way to know is to keep going. If you've been traveling with us this far, you've already left the ordinary behind. Subscribe now if you haven't. And ask yourself, in this moment, this now, what part of you is watching? Part 5, Consciousness without a brain? Is the mind just a byproduct of the brain? Or could consciousness exist without it? In today's episode, we explore the most provocative question in the science of mind. Can consciousness survive the death of the brain? We'll look at evidence, skepticism, and what it means if the brain isn't the whole story. Stay with us until the end, you'll never think about awareness the same way again. 1. The materialist view, mind equals brain. For decades, science has worked under one assumption. Your consciousness is produced by your brain. Damage the brain, consciousness fades. Stimulate it, consciousness shifts. Anesthesia. Brain injury. Drugs. Sleep. These all change your experience of reality. Which seems to prove no brain, no mind. This is known as materialism, the belief that all mental states arise from physical processes. But what if that's not the full picture? 2. Cracks in the materialist model. Here's the problem. Neuroscience can correlate brain activity with conscious experience. But it still can't explain consciousness itself. This is the hard problem. coined by philosopher David Chalmers. It asks, why does brain activity produce subjective experience at all? Why do electrical signals create color, taste, pain, joy? No one knows. And the deeper we look, the stranger it gets. Some scientists now admit, we don't know how consciousness arises. We don't know where it resides. And we can't rule out non-brain-based explanations. Which brings us to something controversial. 3. Near-death experiences, NDEs. People who have been declared clinically dead often report vivid experiences. Floating above their bodies. Moving through tunnels. Encountering light or beings. Reviewing their entire lives. Take the case of Pam Reynolds, a patient whose brain was completely shut down during surgery. No EEG. No blood flow. Body temp near freezing. Yet she reported detailed observations from the operating room, verified later by medical staff. How? Her brain was offline. But something was still aware. Could these just be hallucinations? Dying neurons firing? That's what skeptics say. But the timing often doesn't fit. Some NDEs occur before or after heart stoppage. Others include verifiable information patients couldn't have known. Even cautious scientists are intrigued. 4. Consciousness during cardiac arrest, the AWARE study. In the largest scientific study of near-death experiences, called AWARE, researchers studied patients who had been resuscitated after cardiac arrest. Some reported seeing events in the room after they were clinically dead. In one case, a patient correctly described events that happened 3 minutes after his heart stopped. That shouldn't be possible. The researchers concluded. Consciousness may continue for a short period after clinical death. Not proof. But a clue. One that keeps the door open. 5. Terminal lucidity, a final flash of mind. Another eerie phenomenon. Terminal lucidity. In this event, patients with severe brain damage, sometimes in comas or with Alzheimer's, suddenly become alert, coherent, even joyful, right before death. They recognize loved ones. They speak clearly. They seem themselves again. Then, minutes or hours later, they die. But how does a broken brain suddenly produce clarity? Some suggest it's just chemical surges. Others wonder, is the mind returning before it departs? Again, not proof. But evidence that something strange is happening right at the edge of life and death. 6. The filter theory, is the brain a receiver? Here's a radical idea proposed by thinkers like Aldous Huxley and William James. The brain doesn't generate consciousness. It filters it. Like a radio tuning into specific frequencies, your brain might be narrowing down a vast field of awareness. When the brain is damaged or stops altogether, the filter loosens. And consciousness expands. This could explain mystical experiences, psychedelic visions, NDEs, terminal lucidity. Again, we don't know. But this model fits the data in ways materialism struggles to. 7. Real-world analogy, the television metaphor. Think of your brain as a TV set. You watch a show. Change the channel. Turn it off. The picture disappears, but not because the show stopped. The signal still exists, the receiver is just offline. If your brain is the receiver of consciousness, then brain death might not end consciousness. It might just disconnect your access to this channel. That's why so many ancient traditions speak of a self beyond the body, a deeper awareness untouched by brain states. Modern science is now cautiously asking the same question. 8. Challenges and skepticism. Of course, not everyone agrees. Skeptics argue NDEs are just hallucinations from oxygen-starved brains. Terminal lucidity is random neuron firing. There's no solid evidence for awareness outside the body. Fair enough. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. And yet, the current models don't fully explain the data. There's a gap. And that gap is growing. Some scientists argue we need a post-materialist science, one that doesn't assume mind equals brain by default. The debate is far from over. 9. What if you're more than a brain? Let's pause. If consciousness can exist without the brain, then what are you? Not just neurons. Not just memories. But something non-local. Fundamental. Aware, beyond birth and death. This doesn't mean religion. It doesn't mean blind belief. It means humility. Maybe your brain is the interface. And what you call you is the user logged in for a while. Maybe death isn't the end. Maybe it's the logout. Or maybe it's just a reboot. 10. Coming next, the simulation hypothesis. We've gone deep into the nature of consciousness. We've questioned the brain, time, the self. But there's one more level. What if everything, your mind, your senses, this universe, is part of a simulation? In part 6, we tackle the simulation hypothesis. We'll explore the logic of simulated realities. Arguments by Elon Musk and Nick Bostrom. And the eerie signs we might be inside something we didn't create. So subscribe now if you haven't yet. Because we're just getting to the strangest part of the journey. Consciousness may be more than the brain. But what if even the brain is code? Part 6, the simulation hypothesis. Everything you've seen. Everything you've felt. Everything you've believed about reality. What if it's not real? What if this world is a simulation? In this final episode, we ask the ultimate question. Is your consciousness trapped inside code? Let's explore one of the most controversial, fascinating, and unsettling theories of modern science and philosophy. The simulation hypothesis. 1. What is the simulation hypothesis? In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom made a bold claim. If any advanced civilization develops the ability to simulate conscious beings inside a digital world, then one of the following must be true. No such civilization ever reaches that level of tech. They do, but choose not to run simulations. They do, and they run millions of them. If number 3 is true, then the odds that you're in the one base reality are extremely small. You're probably in one of the simulations. Think about that. Everything you know could be the equivalent of high-resolution software. 2. Why would anyone run a simulation of us? It sounds crazy, until you realize we're already doing it. We run complex simulations to study climate, evolution, economics. We build entire digital ecosystems in video games. We experiment with AI agents in virtual labs. We're already creating simulated worlds with digital entities that learn, react, and soon, maybe even feel. Fast forward a few hundred years. Imagine what a future civilization could do. They could simulate entire histories. Not for fun, but for research. And inside those simulations, conscious beings like us might emerge. Just as your brain generates an illusion of self, so might a simulation generate an illusion of world. 3. The evidence. Are there glitches in the matrix? Many thinkers point to strange anomalies in physics that suggest we might be living in something constructed. The pixelated universe. At the smallest scales, reality seems discrete, not continuous like pixels on a screen. The speed of light. There's a universal speed limit. Why? Maybe it's the refresh rate of the system. Quantum mechanics. Particles exist in multiple states until observed, like rendering in a video game. Reality collapses when a player looks. Mathematics at the core. Everything matter, motion, energy reduces to elegant math. That's suspicious. Why is reality so computable? Even scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Elon Musk say the odds we're in base reality might be billions to 1. For simulation inside simulation, a conscious stack? Now here's where it gets mind-bending. If you're a conscious being inside a simulation, What is your mind? Not a brain, technically. A simulation of a brain. Your neural network is just data running on someone else's hardware. But remember, consciousness may not require biology. It might arise from the pattern itself. If that's true, then simulated minds can be real minds. And your experiences, though digitally constructed, are still felt. You don't need a physical brain to be conscious. Just a structure capable of self-modeling. And you have that right now. Even if you're not real in the physical sense, you're real enough to feel. 5. The moral implications. If we are in a simulation, the implications are staggering. Who built it? Why are we here? Are we being observed? Are there ethical limits? If beings can simulate us, they can also turn us off. Is death just the code ending? Is déjà vu a memory error? Are dreams a test environment? It sounds like science fiction because it is. But science fiction has a habit of becoming science fact. And if you've ever felt that sense, that life isn't quite real, you might be closer to the truth than you think. 6. Consciousness, the final puzzle. We began this series with one question. Are you just a brain? Now, we're not even sure there is a brain. Just patterns. Programs. Simulated systems of awareness. And yet, you're here. Watching. Thinking. Feeling. That's the paradox. Even if you're inside a simulation, even if the self is an illusion, even if the world is code, you are conscious. And that makes you undeniably real. Maybe consciousness isn't the product of matter. Maybe matter is the shadow of consciousness. And maybe this whole reality exists because you're observing it. 7. So, what do you do now? You've followed this journey from brain to self, from illusion to simulation. You've questioned your memories, your mind, your very sense of time. So what now? If everything is simulated, do you just give up? No. You live deliberately. Because meaning doesn't come from certainty. It comes from choice. Maybe the simulation ends tomorrow. Maybe it doesn't matter if you're real or code. What matters is what you do with your awareness. Choose curiosity over certainty. Compassion over control. Presence over distraction. The illusion of consciousness may be the greatest trick the universe or simulator ever pulled. But awareness? That's no illusion. Final hook, what if this isn't the end? This is the final part of the series. Or is it? Because the illusion of consciousness has layers we haven't touched. Can AI become conscious? What happens after the simulation ends? Is there something beyond awareness itself? You decide if we go deeper. Comment below if you want a bonus series on consciousness beyond the simulation. And if you haven't already, subscribe now. Because this might be a simulation. But the questions we've asked? They're real. And so are you.